حي على الفلاح.
There was once an occasion when the Prophet of Allah was by the Kaaba in the Haram, and a man by the name of Abu Hakam ibn Hisham, who was of course later on named Abu Jahl, came to the Prophet of Allah and he began to abuse him, began to slander him, and he began to attack his personality, attack his character, and more importantly attack his religion, which he of course despised, because Abu Jahl being one of the leaders of the Quraysh, for them religion was a way of life, so to speak, in the sense that it contained elements of trade, of transactions, of social life, economic life, political life. They bought their idols, they sold them, they revered them, they worshipped them. And so for anyone therefore to attack that way of life, it was a big and grave insult against not only those chieftains of Mecca, but everything that they stood for. The difficulty the Prophet was in right there, because his followers were few, and he didn't have much support, physical support, and he's isolated there. Now, one of those who was a witness to this incident was a maidservant. What actually happened was that when Hamza comes along, he had been hunting in the desert, and when he comes along, she exclaims, "Ya Abu Amara, only you had seen what has happened to your nephews, Muhammad." Abu Jahl came and he attacked him verbally, physically, and he began to mention so many things that the Prophet would dislike to hear. And so she's telling Hamza, this is what's just happened right now to your nephew. And so he had this feeling within himself, that is my relative that's been insulted, and we're from the same tribe. And so what he does is he's come back from hunting, and he has a bow in his hand, and he strikes Abu Jahl with the bow. And you could imagine all the people around him from his tribe, Banu Makhzum, were there, and they were about to get up, with their swords. Hamza spoke, right, and he says, "Do you abuse Muhammad ﷺ whilst I am on his religion? And I say what he's saying." And he says, "Strike me back, return this attack that I've done on you, return it back to me if you're able to." Right? So he's challenging him then. Banu Makhzum, they all got up, and then Banu Hashim gets up, his tribe, right? And there's you can sense a skirmish might take place. And then Abu Jahl realizes he's the one that started the problem in the first place. And it ends, that incident ends there, but something else happened. Hamza radiallahu ta'ala an has just, out of what seems to be complete impulse, instinctive, announces his conversion to Islam. At that moment in time, he says, "I am on his religion, and I say what he says." Now, what actually happened afterwards was that when Hamza got home, he began to regret his actions in that day. Not his actions, but his statements. He says, "I began to feel so much regret at what I just said. The fact that I had separated myself from the religion of my nation and the religion of my forefathers." He says, "I couldn't sleep, and it would keep coming in my mind. Why did I say such a thing?" But then by the morning, and he begins to pray to Allah, and Allah had placed Iman in my heart, And this is how Hamza became Muslim. It was the enmity of an enemy of Allah, Abu Jahl, that led to the conversion of Hamza. You see, what happened is that once the companions, they were in Dar al-Arqam, which was the house of Arqam, where they used to sit and gather in Mecca in privacy, secrecy, and talk about the new revelation. The Prophet would teach them, and there were a few of them. So what happened is they heard this noise from outside, and someone had to get up and investigate who it was. And so he opened the door just to peek out, and he sees Umar. Umar, who was at that time an enemy of Islam, with his sword. And so quickly shuts the door, and everyone is kind of apprehensive and anxious. No one would go and investigate to begin with, except Hamza. Hamza picks up his sword, I think he must have had a sword, and he goes, "I'll go and check on him." And he says, "Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, if Umar, who they believe was an enemy of Islam, of course at that time he hated Islam, Muslims, He says, Ya Rasulullah, if Umar has come for goodness, then we will reciprocate, we will pay it back in kind, right? We will show goodness with goodness. But Ya Rasulullah, if he's come for evil to attack us, I'll come with his own sword. So, these were the first early days of the conversion of Hamza into this pure religion. He was always with the Prophet of Allah. He was a companion in it. And he was known for his strength and his bravery, right? That he would take it upon himself to defend the Prophet of Allah against any insult. And Umar was like that as well, right? Umar and Ali and the others were like that also. Umar's case is very profound. The fact that he took his sword to go and fight the Prophet of Allah until he was met by the news that his sister Fatima and her husband have become Muslim. Go and check out on her first before you make war with anybody else, right? And then he, of course, the story is longer, he became a Muslim, and then he's carrying his sword in defense of the Prophet of Allah. And it's an amazing transformation in these companions. That how were they so moved? And that is the working of Iman in their heart. So in the sphere of the companions, you have some that you know for their strength. Ali was known for being strong as you grow older in age, right? Abu Bakr was strong, right? Umar was strong, and the others were strong. Hamza included was a very strong individual who, fought bravely, and in the Battle of Badr, he was known for many of the leaders of the mushrikeen. And that in fact is what kind of motivated, spurned the mushrikeen who were left behind and to want revenge in the Battle of Uhud, right? So Hamza therefore fought bravely in the Battle of Badr. By the time of Uhud, the story, what happened is the mushrikeen had mustered a very large strength, and their rationale, the motivation was to go and kill the Prophet of Allah, right? That's it. Now what the mushrikeen they did is that they requested for a man by the name of Wahshi, who was an Ethiopian slave. They petitioned him to kill Hamza. And that's all he has to do. Why? Because they were bitter and they wanted revenge. Hind, for example, the wife of Abu Sufyan, she had that sense of rage. She wants revenge. And Hamza has to pay the price from their perspective. And so they say to Wahshi, go out with the people, and if you Hamza, you're free. You're a free man. You're not a slave anymore. Now imagine what I must have felt for Wahshi. I'm not a Muslim, doesn't mean anything to me. I'd love to be free, I'll do it. Hind would go and take her jewelry and says, all of this is for you, right? She's trying to tempt him by doing that. And he didn't have to do anything in the battle. He just simply hid behind a rock. The entire battle, hid behind a rock. He wasn't participating, but he had his spear. And he was an expert thrower of the spear. Hid behind a rock until Hamza came close enough, and then he took his spear, shaked it up, and he threw the spear, and it struck Hamza in the abdomen, and it went through his body. May Allah have mercy on him. The master, Sayyid al-Shuhada, the master of martyrs. That is something that we call him. From other narrations as well, Uhud was a very tragic incident for the Muslims because 70 great Sahaba were killed. Mus'ab ibn Umair was killed. The Prophet lost a tooth, his jaw was smashed, he was bleeding himself, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. It was a very hard occasion. But to have Hamza, who the Sahaba relied on, and who was there from the beginning, because he was a Muhajir, remember, and he was one of the Sabiqun al-Awwalun, the first of the first from the Muhajirin. And it was very, very hard on the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet said, there has been no thing I've witnessed, seen, then that is harder for me than this scene. So you can imagine it. They mutilated the body of Hamza, right? Hind wanted to take his liver out and to chew on that liver, which was what happened. And then found it bitter. She spitted it out, but then she said, she said, I'm cured within myself now, and what I wanted to do, my oath has been fulfilled, and Wahshi has removed the distress and the grief from my heart. But the Sahaba were completely destroyed. Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he says this was the hardest moment for us thus far. When the Prophet came upon him, the Prophet said to him, Rahmatullahi alayk, may Allah have mercy on you. You were someone, so much of a doer of good actions. And you were someone who would join ties of kinship. You know, Wahshi, he became Muslim, right? And he participated in the Battle of Yamama against the false prophet Musaylima. And one thing that he says is, he says, if I use my spear to kill the best of people, Hamza, then I wish and I hope that Allah would forgive me if I kill with the same spear the worst of people, Musaylima. And he was in fact one of those who killed Musaylim al-Kadhab, the false prophet. May Allah be pleased with him, the leader of the martyrs, the lion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And may Allah send his peace and blessings upon Muhammad ibn Abdullah Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.